Hello, everyone. Thank you all for joining us for another Microsoft Reactor live stream event. My name is Rebecca Karen, and I am the New York Reactor's event planner here. So for me, it's just the beginning of the afternoon. It might be the morning or the evening for you. We're just happy to have you here for this, another one of Lisa's sessions. I'm happy to welcome Lisa Cohen, a Principal Data Scientist Manager from Microsoft's Cloud Data Sciences team back again. She has been working with the Reactor on an ongoing series focused on personal and business development, so we're glad to have this continued relationship. Today, Lisa will be discussing what women in tech need to get a seat at the table. This session will run for approximately 60 minutes. Lisa will be answering some questions throughout the session, and there'll be some additional time at the end as well. If this is your first time joining us, please note that for Teams live sessions, there is a 30-second delay from speaker to audience, so feel free to post questions in the chat, but just be aware that there may be a slight lag in response because of this delay. Also to note, this session is being recorded. It will be available on our YouTube channel in a few days. So if you're not able to stay for the entire session, no worries. You can tune in at a later time at your convenience. Or if there's something that's covered and you want to circle back, it also will be there. At the conclusion of the session, I will share a link to our feedback survey. The Reactor program is always striving to provide new and engaging content, and your feedback really helps us with that. So please do feel free to submit that survey form. Just to note, I dropped a code of conduct into the chat. Please review and make sure we are keeping questions on topic. At this time, I will pass the mic over to Lisa and let her go from here. Thank you again, Lisa, for taking your time.
Great, thanks for the introduction, Rebecca, and for all of your help with this ongoing series. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. We're going to be talking about a number of different career advice and tips for women in tech. My name is Lisa Cohen. I lead a group in the Microsoft Cloud Data Sciences organization. And I'll share a bit about my background in tech here. Always been very passionate about the applied sciences space, starting with my bachelor and master in applied math. I joined Microsoft 17 years ago in the Visual Studio group, so that was a great experience getting to work on tools for millions of developers, shipped a number of releases there and had a few different roles. Over time, I got into a space where we were analyzing customer feedback and telemetry, and increasingly focused on the quantitative feedback we were getting as well to complement the qualitative, and started doing things like product and business analytics, looking at our analyzing our feature set, and then moved into Azure and a data science group. It's the current team that I'm part of, and the cross-functional organization that I lead around data science, experimentation, machine learning, data visualization, as well as product management. So our charter is to help customers be successful in the cloud. I'm also very passionate about communities, so relevant topic for today. I lead a Women in Data Sciences group here at Microsoft, develop mentor rings, also help with a group for managers, a book club, where we can have ongoing learning, as well as various data science communities. I enjoy engaging with universities as well, whether that's my role at UW here, as well as hosting capstone projects from a variety of universities, working with students there as well, and then speaking on a variety of topics. I thought for the purpose of today's talk, I'll also give a bit of the personal intro, so you can see my family here in the middle. So I'm a mom, a wife, an athlete. I love spending time outdoors, and so I find all these different aspects of my life actually kind of give me learnings in different ways that I can bring together in each forum in kind of a multidisciplinary way. So here's our agenda for today. We'll start with a variety of tips for women in tech. We'll deep dive on a few approaches, and then we'll go into some tips for moms as well. So first off, I kind of structured this also based on just my journey over time throughout my career. And I think when this topic around women in tech came up, it's really varied given my different career stages, life stages, and so we'll explore those in order. But if I think back to when I was first working in different internships, or when I first started at Microsoft, I was typically the only woman in my immediate group, or I was also younger, and so how do you kind of quickly establish yourself and get to focus on driving the strategy and contributing in the group. And I've actually written a blog post also about onboarding to a team that you can check out that goes into more details. But a few things I'll just mention here is that as far as establishing yourself, establishing your expertise, I think, is a great way to ground the conversation. So doing your homework before the meetings, coming in with a unique point of view. In my space with data science, maybe that's a specific data insight that you have that helps advance the conversation. And so that's a great way to kind of just get the conversation going on the topic that's there, and establish yourself as a clear contributor to the strategy and the insights. Delivering reliably, like having that those quick wins as well as ongoing track record of contributions, I think, is another way to really build a reputation around your work. Speaking up and sitting at the table, so that's a phrase from Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In book, and I think it's an important one. I think there's a lot of different considerations around this topic of when to speak up in a meeting, for example. Sometimes you might think like, oh, I'm not sure how much this adds, or it's already been said. You're there in that meeting for a reason, because you have things to contribute. So absolutely do, if you're there and you don't contribute anything, then it would call a question of why you're taking your time to be there. So I think one silver lining about this remote environment is that with online meetings like Teams, we have this chat channel. There's so many different ways to participate in the conversation. So definitely advocate for the chat if you're, as a way that people can, if let's say you're more comfortable perhaps writing, that can be a way to kind of enter the conversation. There's also the raise hand feature, I think, is a great way to step in. There's additional features that have been released where you can share reactions or whatnot throughout. But I think do take advantage of all the different tools there. And yeah, with the point around, well, maybe it's already been said, I also find in that case, sometimes it's important for folks to know that others agree with that, or, for the particular team that you represent, that this also aligns with that team's perspective or approach. For example, for me in data science, that strategy aligns with the data and what we're seeing there as well. So that's a case where, it can also add value to add on your support, or maybe you have a different point of view, and that's important as well. We're going to end up with the best solution when we hear everybody's point of view and come to a unified conclusion. So then as you come to kind of how do you speak up, I have this point around developing your executive presence and finding your natural style, because there are multiple ways to go about this, and you need to find the one that works for you. For my personal journey on this, I think there's some things that I've changed over time. I laugh a little bit because we'll see if any of them creep back in today's session, but things like filler words, or being able to concisely state my point as opposed to kind of a more lengthy or verbose explanation. Those are things that I have practiced, learned, adapted over time in order to help my message get across best with my audience. There's other things that I wouldn't change because it wouldn't feel natural for me. So once I had someone tell me, hey, I want to hear you get really loud on this topic, and that's the only way I'm going to know that you're excited about it. And my demeanor is a little bit more of a calmer demeanor, but I absolutely do speak up when there's something that I feel strongly or passionate about, and I just find the way that's natural for me to express that. And I've actually had people then reach out over the years for mentoring on that topic to find also how they can stand up or state a strong point of view if they also have more of that calmer demeanor approach. So yeah, just a specific example there to say, whatever it is for you, find that natural style and a way that comes across. This is a great area to request feedback from others who are in the meeting. After the meeting, if there's someone you trust, ask them, hey, how did this come across? What can I do better? What can I improve? And that's a great way to also iterate. Another tip I'll say for women is around communicating your goals and interests. This is a tip for everybody, but one that I see comes up for women particularly as well. And this is around, telling your manager, for example, what your career goals are and what you want to be working on and what your aspirations may be. So I heard this story actually at, I think, the first women's conference I joined at Microsoft. There was an external speaker who was telling about an example where there was a professor and there were 2 students in the class, and they both wanted to be teaching assistants, but there were more than 2 students in the class, but it was a story about 2 of them. One of them expressed to the professor that he wanted to be the teaching assistant, and the student just thought, the female student thought if she just did really good work that she would naturally be considered, and that was her path. And the role became available, and the professor asked the man if he would like to take the role because he knew that he was interested in it, and the opportunity came up, so it seemed like a good fit. So I share that just so that you can kind of understand like how these things unfold and how they happen, and that missed opportunity if you don't share what you're looking for as well. I think there's other lessons from that story about on the professor side, and like for myself as a manager, how do you make sure that you're creating an equitable environment where everybody gets those opportunities? So that's, things like scheduling regular career conversations with everybody on your team, and when people join, asking what their goals and interests are. I think we're going to have the best outcomes when both the individuals are voicing and the folks who have those opportunities to share are also doing their work. So I think for your own perspective to set up for success, making sure to be comfortable sharing those is important as well. Another point I'll raise is around identifying allies. I've seen this in a number of different approaches. I think, yeah, some people I know have used this actually if they're having trouble in a meeting getting their point across, or if it's been attributed to someone else, they might message somebody who's an ally to kind of help straighten out the story or help convey their point. One way I like to use this is just in general, before you go to a meeting, if you're going to present a new idea or approach, it's always the best practice to start socializing with the attendees in advance, of course share with everybody in advance so they can respond by sharing the meeting content before the time of the meeting, but then also meet with people one-on-one, and that's a great way that I get to further hone the content. I get to take into account additional considerations, get feedback and buy-in, and then of course sets up for a strong meeting when you come in and there's already a lot of shared alignment. There might also be a case for this where you're sharing a certain perspective or point of view, but you might be stuck in a certain way, and while definitely want to empower everybody to be able to drive those conversations themselves, there are going to be some cases where it's going to be helpful to also have your manager being a spokesperson for your idea and having that alignment so that they can also be driving it at their leadership level. So those are just a couple examples to help amplify your voice. Another one I'll mention is finding your tribe or your community, a kind of support group. I think these communities are incredibly powerful. That example I shared was one of the women in cloud data sciences that I lead, or equivalent that there are, in many different organizations. Also in the industry, there's a number of these groups. There's a Facebook group for women in product, which is excellent. There are LinkedIn groups that you can join. I participate in some for women in tech or data science, just generally in data science, not even specific to women, but anyway, I think a few things I find about these communities is that one, you find that some of the things you're working on, or the challenges or the goals you have are shared across other community members. So for one, you're not alone. You get tips and support from others who have tried things or at different stages. So that's incredibly valuable as well. And then there's just kind of some great energy from knowing, hey, we're going through this together. I would say, on that point, this week has been incredibly energizing with the International Women's Day, Women's History Month. There's, this session is part of a broader series that the Reactor has been hosting. So I definitely encourage folks to check that out. I also got to speak at a International Women in Data Science event, and there's just some amazing energy that comes from being able to see, connect, hear from all these different women leaders around the world, and it's really just an exciting thing. Almost hard to kind of put words to that energy, but I think attending the Grace Hopper conference is another one of those examples as well, where it's just incredible to see. I think we're in a field where we're often a minority, but then you kind of have these environments where where you're part of a broader group that and so some great outcomes that come from that. Another one here I had is the power of three. This is just a note. There's actually some research that once you have three of any minority in a room or at the table for a meeting, that it actually kind of equalizes the conversation, or it kind of takes that element out. And so just a consideration as we're work on our diversity and inclusion, as I don't think that's where it ends, but it's a good, if you're not there in a certain situation, a good milestone to strive for meetings or different situations that you run. And then on that same front about how can we help create more of the cause and the environment we want to be a part of. So paying it forward, mentoring other women, sharing what you've learned, experiences you've had, participating in these communities, I think is a great activity as well. So I'll pause here just for a moment to check the Q&A chat. I'll have, as Rebecca mentioned, another natural break point during the presentation, and then at the end we'll have Q&A as well. But I'm happy to keep this interactive, and I'll repeat questions anonymously. So yeah, feel free to add any comments there if you have questions around anything that I raise, additional scenarios or challenges that you're facing, so we can help share here together. All right. So then I wanted to get into a number of specific approaches, and some of these are just kind of how to think through these scenarios. For one, I had a point around avoiding intimidation. So I think there's a natural tendency that can occur at times of what I just called here, for lack of a better name, a counting game. So you walk into a room and you would say like, okay, I guess there's only 2 women out of 50 people here, or whatever the stat might be. I don't find that like that can go in multiple directions. Some of them can be unhealthy, so it could make you feel like you don't belong there, or that it's kind of an oddity. That's not typically very productive. I like to turn that around, and one example of doing that would be, I presented a number of different conferences or events. I remember when I was first starting at developer tech conferences, looking around and noticing this, and then I realized that hey, people who are here are also trying to establish themselves, and what a better way to be easily remembered. There's probably no other female redhead here, so at least I have that part covered, that it's unique and memorable in that way. So just an example of how we can kind of turn that around and like think about the positive light here, while we do continue to work on bringing more women in tech into these fields. Another one is around positive self-talk. So that's where I mentioned, again, looking at a specific scenario, you can go all different directions in terms of how you interpret it and kind of what you tell yourself. I think women have more of a tendency on the negative self-talk, whether that's kind of imposter syndrome or inner critics and things of that nature. And so it is really important to keep that positive, productive, healthy thread. One thing I put in here is decide what's useful for you and bracket the rest. And what I mean for that is, like, if you find a certain pattern, if you're kind of thinking through something in a way that's blocking you or not productive, you can actually just make a choice to not dwell there and focus more productive spaces. So try to be kind of conscious, I think, around where your energy is. There are going to be challenges, I think, for anybody in their career that we have to work through, and there's certainly unique scenarios for women as well. So that's where I put a point around just that resilience and grit and being able to work through those. A few other things that help create a good like pH balance, I suppose, if you will, on that positive thinking is the self-care, the getting your sleep, getting your exercise, drinking your water, thinking from a gratefulness perspective. This is a practice where you can do journaling, or sometimes at the end of each day, people will write down on a notebook like what are 3 things that you're grateful for. So that's an amazing practice and something that you write down like big things, small things, and can really add up on a pretty positive outlook. Listen to feedback, but don't take it personally. There's a book, there's probably many, but one about this is called Thanks for the Feedback. It talks about, just the specific paths we can go with feedback. And this is something I learned early on, playing softball and having loud coaches yelling, all kinds of things. But I think just listening to specifically, what do I have to do? How do I take this feedback? How do I act on it? And not creating a whole story in your head about who's giving the feedback, what else they might mean by it, what it means in terms of larger context, just really taking it for what it is and considering it a gift in that way. That's a way that we eliminate blind spots. We, just kind of a perception is reality. We learn about the reality of how the things that we're doing are being perceived. And so it's actually amazing to get that input. So do kind of welcome it in that way as well. I find the humor. That's another thing that I enjoy that kind of takes me through any of these scenarios. So I can give a specific example of that. Was maybe going back to the first item, this counting game. I remember one internship I was in. I was one of 30 in a software development team, and I was the only woman, and we went out to lunch. And I remember just kind of being amused, like, I wonder what this waitress, thinks is happening here. And, rather than kind of thinking other directions. So I think that's just one example, but there's many of these where we can, just find some humor in a situation, and that's a way to lighten things up as well for anything in life. And then lastly, I put create the environment you want to be a part of and ask open questions. So if I read this quote recently that the grass is greener where you water it. So definitely something that I'm really passionate about as well. I think, we all can, by the way we carry ourselves, by the things we accept in our environment, by the questions we raise, the things we point out, we help create the environment that we live in a better place, the place that we want to be a part of. And so a number of examples there. If you get a comment from somebody else that doesn't strike you the right way, or that kind of made you feel uncomfortable, or the way you read it didn't come across right, follow up with them. Ask, what did you mean by that? Can you tell me more? I would say probably 70 or 80% of the time when I do that, they have no idea how it came across. They really didn't mean it that way. And they clarify, they learn so that they're not going to say something that way in the future as well. It might have just been an email that came across a little edgy or harsh, and it's kind of hard to get context in email, and you follow up and chat, and it's like, no, everything is fine, and or you learn something else about their situation that's going on that you didn't know, and you sort it out and you work through it. So that's fine. Maybe there are some cases where they meant something. Maybe there was a blame that was unwarranted, and then you stand up and you let them know that actually that's not going to be tolerated, that's not acceptable. And I think it's really important to assert yourself, whether that's for yourself or someone on your team or someone else that you're speaking up for, because I think in the absence of that, it's an invitation for that behavior to continue. And so I put ask open-ended questions. I think that's just a really great way to start the conversation, not make assumptions. And like I mentioned, so many cases, it's really not even intended that way as well. And then, in the cases where you do find that it is a real issue, then, being able to really just have a really objective conversation, share some persuasive points, and I find that does create change in the environment as well. So I'm going to take a break here for a moment and switch over the Q&A. So one came in about how do you stop being defensive when getting feedback? What if you're very emotive? I think this is a great point. So I think one general practice, whenever you can, sleep on something and come back the next day. I find that does wonders. A lot of times we feel a sense of urgency. We need to respond in the moment. Maybe you're getting the feedback live and you do need to say something in the moment. Something you can do is just in that moment say, thanks, that's a lot for me to take in right now. I'd like to go back and think about this and come back so we can have a further conversation. That technique actually works as well in the other case where I mentioned something comes up and something was said not right, but you're not sure how to respond. You can just say something like, hey, that didn't sound quite right to me. Let me get back to you. So there are some of these cases where you can respond in the moment. If you haven't fully gotten to, it might be new information, you need some time to process it. There's definitely ways to respond in a way that you're going to come back. And then whether that's one day later, a week later, I wouldn't let it go on too long. But I do find, in that case, when you can take time to think through it, you can definitely have a much more productive conversation when you come back. And so I've had cases where I've taken the feedback, then written down some bullets. Here's what I think this means. Here's what I plan to do next or differently, and then went back to the feedback giver. They said, oh, I think you're kind of maybe even overdoing that. Maybe I didn't mean it quite so much that way. Or, I think it's actually really productive to have that further dialogue and conversation. If you continue to be emotional when you come back on the conversation, I think there's probably something more to explore there. I mentioned all the different, the self-care things. Make sure that you do get your rest, that you have some outlet where you can get that energy out. Explore if there's some kind of trigger that's going on with that feedback. If there's like a larger topic that you need to kind of unpack that you're working through. So those are a few things I'll add there without having further details. So there's a next question around the tech culture has a strong bro culture and it burns out women in tech. Do you think it has worsened over the years? And feel free if you want to add any clarifying comments also around the bro culture and what you're referring to there. But I think I got the main point. As far as whether it's worsened over the years, to be honest, I think it's improving. I'm sure mileage will vary in every scenario. Just the level of focus on diversity and inclusion efforts is, it's extensive, and there's the activities, and then there's the results. But I think more and more we're also starting to have both of those, both initiatives as well as actually metrics and things like diversity and inclusion reports being published from companies. And so I think those are, for one, just even having that data and having that socialized drives change by the fact that people can see it and can work towards that. But I think, there's even executive compensation and things of that nature. Like this is becoming more of a factor. Even partners and the way that companies engage with them have criteria around diversity and inclusion, and so it's becoming more of a business criteria, which I think is great progress. And as it should, that having that diversity of opinion helps us come out with the best ideas, helps us build products that work best for all of our users by being better representing the world, having that representation in the team. So those are some things that are encouraging for me. There's there's a lot of training going on, even, you know, just the startups and companies around helping with hiring more diverse backgrounds. I think that gives me also, you know, further confidence that like there's some good things happening here. I don't want to paint a picture like it's definitely not a solved problem. We still have a lot of work to go, but just as far as like whether it's getting worse or better, I do think we're heading in the right direction. I think the trainings are helpful. I think, you know, as much as we can live it, you know, culture is not just what you put on the wall, but it's actually what you live through through your hiring practices, through your what you recognize in the company, what you promote. And, you know, these examples that I was sharing about creating the environment you want to be a part of and asking open questions, I think it's going to take all of us leaning in. I don't think, you know, on the one hand, you don't want to leave it too much up to the minority group. Like it shouldn't be extra work for the minority group, but there are going to be cases where, you know, we need to speak up. There are forums where I'm the only woman in that forum, and you know, unfortunately, like people, you know, they don't realize like the impact that might be going on for women. So I do need to speak up and share that. And of course, then, you know, then they're happy to adapt or incorporate, but it does take, you know, without saying that awareness wouldn't be there. And I think with the training and the focus right now, that lack of awareness is not as much accepted either. I think there's more of an expectation that we're aware of those unconscious biases, and that, you know, folks in majority groups are also taking that moment to reflect on what the minority experiences are in the room. So again, I think that's also progress, but yeah, it's going to be a process getting it there. And so really this talk is focused around, you know, what are the things that we can do to set up best for success in the meantime? What are things we can do to continue to move that progress along? All right. How do I handle my question? I'm just going to the next question here. How do I handle my questions or responses being not important and can be dismissed? Because a few days later, if the same question or response is given by a male colleague, it's a good question, and the meeting proceeds to spend the rest of the time answering that question. Yeah, and that's the example I was actually referring to with an ally. Just like for transparency, I hadn't tried that myself. As I don't know if I had like that exact situation on. Anyway, I heard from someone who had found good success from like finding an ally who could then say, oh yeah, that was Marissa's, like that's just like what Marissa said earlier. Whereas just using Marissa as a random name here, but if you voice it yourself, it's harder in that situation to say, hey, that's what I just said earlier, if you're not getting recognized for that idea. I have done that as well. I've been in a case where that occurred, where, you know, idea I mentioned came up. You know, I have voiced it objectively. I think from while it might feel like self-serving to have to point that out, at least people know in the end, so it's probably better than not. But yeah, that ally scenario that I've heard used as well, I think is specifically directed at this scenario where I have had a case where like my manager would point out, oh yeah, that's what Lisa was referring to. That's such an easier conversation. That's then it's not like a confrontational one versus another. So so that can be a useful technique there. Other things on this, I talked about being able to share meeting content in advance. That's actually an inclusive technique too. So overall, we've been moving to more document-led meetings. This is where rather than have slides, you can still have slides to help kind of move the conversation along in the discussion, but we'll share a document in advance, and that's a pretty thorough way to share your thinking, analysis, and then people can actually respond offline or advance. So if you're sharing an email in response to, or you're putting a comment in the doc, it's very clear that that's your idea. So that's another thing to explore there. And then lastly, again, without knowing the details, but just another area to explore is, you know, we talked about the executive presence, how to speak up, how to have a voice. Those are that's another space you could also explore to see if that helps you get your point across in those meetings. So, I've mentioned a bit about how I also had adapted my style, especially in an exec meeting, to be like the very more precise, concise, focus on the business takeaway. Sometimes we use this framework of the what, the facts, the so what, the implication, the now what, what's your recommendation. So, wherever you can really focus kind of further on the now what can help those questions or points that you have come across as being more important and significant and kind of create that sense of urgency or change that we do need to consider this. There's also speaking coaches you can leverage. There's one that our team has worked with. It's a group called Communication and Power, and they do a number of like conference trainings. And so I think that's another example where you can get some additional coaching. But lastly, just even recording yourself is a great tool also for presentation. See how you come across. There are things that you're going to notice as well. So just a few ideas, and I'm sorry to hear that's happening. So yeah, some ways that we can make progress here in the meantime here. Okay, also another question here is also not taking things said personally, or yes, just ask without emotion. Yes, I think there's 2 points here. One was about, again, like how to take feedback without getting emotional about it. So I think we got to discuss that with the earlier question, but then about, not just saying yes. I think that's a great point as well. There's a lot more learning that happens from continuing the conversation, going deeper into the feedback. So I find that's actually really productive. Similarly, when you get a question in a meeting, rather than, just that's a good question. For one, often I think, sometimes we'll use that because we don't have the 110% answer at that point. But I think, just sharing what actually advances the conversation. And I think women have a higher threshold of what they need to know before they can respond. So there are some things you can say in the moment if you're ready there. Like we discussed before, you can actually come back and do that in a separate session. But I do think there is value in going deeper into the feedback, deeper into the question, rather than just a yes. Like I mentioned, one thing I've used before is sharing an action plan. That's another way to kind of say, here, I think this is what you heard. This is what I'm planning to do, is another kind of agenda that you could use for that follow-up meeting to come back and have a deeper conversation. All right, let's see, we might have 2 more questions here. How do you handle feeling like you're on an island alone when asking for change out of a toxic environment? Yeah, this is a great point as well. So that's where I really stress the importance of communities, whether it's things like the mentor ring that I mentioned. I have a post on that as well about how to set those up. But you basically have like 2 lead mentors and then a group of mentees. And so there's just a lot of nice learning, for one, that come from, getting shared topics together, learning about new scenarios that you haven't explored yet, but also just not feeling alone, because it might feel lonely going through this, and getting to talk to others who maybe say the same thing before you even have to or get to it. And then even just sharing yourself and having others say, yes, I experienced that too, I think is actually really powerful, and you definitely get a shared sense of support from that. So do engage with others in groups. Even one-on-one mentoring is great for this as well, just to be like heard, listened to, understood. And then, of course, the further coaching that comes from that. I've written a post also about mentorship and how to look for mentors and how to structure those meetings, so we can follow up there as well. But I think that's an important thing to explore, and especially if you do feel like you're in a toxic environment. I think, we had all the things on this slide have been like how to keep yourself in a productive frame to navigate those situations. And there are going to be some cases where you need to look for a new environment. I do, I try to put those tips in there about how to create the environment that you want to be on. How can you be an agent for change, share things in a productive, persuasive way that they do get adopted and changed. So I think, probably exploring both of those in parallel. So hopefully that's helpful. All right, looks like the rest of these are just comments or thank you. And looks like another participant here also sent the agenda before, so that's great to hear. And okay, someone's actually giving another tip here. That's awesome. So they're saying if you get the feedback, I think this was about how to respond without just saying yes, without any emotion. They made the point, hey, you can say, that's a great point. Can you speak more about X and Y? Yeah, and that's another tool that I use as well, is if I hear a word that just kind of like triggers something, like I'm not like, does it have this connotation? I'll just literally ask, what did you mean by, like, can you tell me more about this? Or what did you mean by that word? And so that's what I mentioned, to ask the open-ended questions. It's amazing the things that you learn from that. Like, you basically have this tip of the iceberg. Like, you just have the one word that they said, and there's a whole different, there's a whole construct under that. And communication, for maybe we start from like if we're all speaking the same language, we might not even have that as first languages, but even just starting with that, it seems like it should be easy to convey, but it's just amazing, like, that all the different contexts we each have and how we interpret the same thing differently. So, asking for those clarifications, I think, is incredibly powerful to get on the same page. All right, I'll move over into the next section here about tips for moms. If we have moms in the audience or people considering this path as well. And again, feel free to share questions throughout. We'll get to them at the end of this section. So for this next life journey, I think there are some common concepts with others we mentioned. One is around connecting with other parents. One thing I thought was actually a cool bonus that occurred at this life stage was that I kind of formed a whole new network with other people at work, all these parents, both moms and dads, to be able to connect on these broader topics. So, it's a bit of, that came up in context of like the networking around the work. I think, so you might ask, like, oh, well, it's not specific about the work topic. How did that advance things? All these scenarios I talked about where we have communication, but we don't have that shared context. As much as you can build some shared context, have a bit of relationship with people that you're working with outside of work, whether that's even just, what does this pandemic look like for you? Everybody has these unique environments. How are you adapting? What are some new hobbies you have? What are some silver linings you found? What is your family doing together, your quarantine pod or whatnot? All of that just helps give some context to others. So what happened in this case was, in the case that you're carrying, and if you're back in person where people can see that, like, people would notice. And this is more kind of towards the end stage, I guess. I would also mention, like, of course, don't want to ask somebody before they're ready to share. But once I was, sharing that I was expecting, all of these dads, moms were all, it's a very exciting time. People are very excited for you. There was also, then once I had my child, all the different tips about what people were navigating. There was a moment where I remember I had a meeting. It was me and two other men, and someone yawned, and then we joked and kind of realized at one point that we had all been up in the middle of the night with a newborn the night before. And there's, anyway, just a new kind of plane of connections that can occur there. So that's kind of fun as well. And useful, I think, maybe even more so during the pandemic, as all of the working parents are navigating the remote learning in different scenarios as well. So then, yeah, this kind of builds on the earlier point about finding the community, but having a community of moms. If you're a new mom, that's incredibly valuable. There's so many new scenarios that you're going to go through. It's an amazing experience, life-changing experience to find new mission life, becoming a parent. There's also just a lot to navigate, a lot of new things to learn, products to buy, new scenarios to explore. So I think, for the same reason I had mentioned having those communities of women in tech, having a community of other moms, whether it's moms just, outside of work. There are communities called things like Program for Early Parenting Support. There are also communities out of whatever hospital you might deliver at, religious communities that have these. So there's a number of those you can set up with, a smaller group. There's also Facebook groups or things of that nature that you can join. I'm sure on LinkedIn as well for moms in tech. So that's another one there. And then again, we talked about how these communities can help get different tips. So like one that I got from that group was as I was going back to work and I was figuring out my schedule and I was going to continue breastfeeding during that time. So I had to figure out when I was going to pump and, tips about what's the most efficient way to clean these things in the middle of the day before I get to back to the office. And so those were things I got to talk with others in the community about, and what size bags I needed to buy, or all of those just details that can be helpful to learn from others. There are also some things that can be challenging during this time. So, depending on health and different things that you navigate, whether that's like the morning sickness or other scenarios that can come up later in pregnancy, that's there's things like the maternity parking spaces, but there's not, I find, like a whole lot for that stage. So there are going to be things, I guess, with the kind of grit and resilience just to work through. And then I think just figuring out, what you need at that time and being able to ask for that. So this next comment, don't leave before you leave. This is also a section in the Sheryl Sandberg Lean In book. Excuse me. What she's referring to here is like giving up opportunities because you think that you won't be able to do them as a mom, or because you're anticipating to become a mom, or even it actually can start even earlier. I've even heard cases where it's like before you have your plan for that, or if you want to have the relationship before you're not in that yet. Like it can start very early. Like I'm not sure if I should go on this career trajectory because I want to also be a mom. So yeah, I mean, I think I don't want to be completely unrealistic. Like you will need to chart out your plan, and I'm sure there's some extremes in terms of like, things that, certain roles that you might need to consider this. I've just, for myself, like as a, working in tech, I found that that I haven't had to make that trade-off. I actually took a role right before one of my maternity leaves. I did wonder if I should just wait until when I got back, and the team mentioned, hey, we're putting this new leadership team into place, so it'd be best to just to get it all in order now, and you'll come back, and it worked out great, and I'm really glad that I took that opportunity. So I find like we can, especially with, I think our work environment has gotten more flexible. It's going to be even more so, I think, after the pandemic with the work from home and where you can work from, and hours or whatnot. Of course, we're going to put in the time, and we're going to, do the work and make the contributions. I just think that there is flexibility such that, you can fit in, you can also have a life. And like I mentioned, I find that, the things I do in my life and the things I do in my work, I learn things on both sides. So maybe I'll get to that point here about the maternity leave and career trajectory. I remember when I was going on my first leave, and I think I had this picture of career kind of going like this, that more time you put in, then the more recognition results you get. There's also all these discussions now about how a career is more of a jungle gym than a ladder, or maybe it's a shooting a ladder. So maybe it's a simplification, but I did wonder, so now I'm going to take this time off, and it's like, am I going to have to just reset this trajectory, or just have a pause and then start up again? And I think one helpful perspective that I've had on this whole topic is that I found that there are things that I also learned while I was on leave. So whether that's time management, prioritization, I think we do a lot of things, but then when we have to get really crisp on like what are the things that are having the biggest impact, we can always find improvements or efficiencies. And so it does force some of that. And I think that's also a common topic during pandemic around how we can just be really laser focused and prioritize the things that have the biggest business impact. In terms of delegation, delegating, having your most prized possession to someone for childcare is a big leap of faith and makes you think a lot about how you want to communicate goals, accountabilities, figure out how you want to do check-in and get feedback. So all of those things are actually like very transferable as well to delegating in the workplace. Of course, the content is different, but the concept and the feeling and just that process. Asking for help, that was something that, I like to do a lot by myself. But, there were times I remember, where you have to ask for help with things for your child, and then you also have to ask for help at work, and that that helps us stay unblocked and move forward and really accelerate progress. And I suppose kind of work through others as well. Presence is one thing that I find really valuable in this overall topic too. This is something Satya, our CEO, had actually reflected on as he thought about work-life balance, and I find relevant for a number of topics. But yeah, essentially it's the concept that when you're there with your family, you're going to be with them. You're not going to have a screen that you're kind of checking in something at work. You're going to be reading a book or just really being there. And then when you're at work, you're going to really be there too. And I think, while there's these different aspects, thoughts around multitasking, we really do our best work when we can focus in those ways. And, as you think about your time, your family time, I do think, quality is really important. You might kind of think about the number of hours you're spending in each place, and those are important things to reflect on. But I think even more so is the fact that you're really taking the quality time when you're spending it as well. And then I mentioned making personal decisions that are right for you and your family. You'll hear about things like mother's instinct about how to care for your kids, but I think just also for knowing what you need is really important. There's going to be a decision point when you need to decide, if you're going to come back to work, if you're going to take time off and then ultimately come back later or not. And it's such a personal decision. For me, I mentioned I really like the combination of these two things, and I love both aspects of my life. But that was, that definitely was a point that I had to, reflect on and determine what's right for me. And I think reflecting on those also makes you confident in your decision, what outcome you come to. But it's super personal. I think, in the moms groups that I was in, that I joined around this time and continue to engage with today, it was probably 50-50 in terms of what people chose. And so, yeah, the other thing that was funny with judgment is that there's some things you might mention oh, I'm never going to have toys around the house. And then you find yourself change on things once you become a parent. So it does lead to that no judgment type of mentality, and just everyone's going to figure out what's best for them. And you yourself might change what your position is on things. So just kind of being open and supportive of that is important. And then, the last point I put on here was to reflect on your priorities and define your own work-life balance. I find work-life balance is most achievable when I can be specific about it. So if I can say, okay, work-life balance means, I'm going to do X, Y, Z during the week, whether that's, be home for every dinner and bedtime, and, I'm have these activities I'm going to do outside of work, or I want to engage in these classes, or have a certain exercise routine or weekend plans, whatever that might be. I think, getting specific about that makes it very achievable. There's another concept called plan your work and work your plan. So plan your work is putting them in the calendar. Working your plan is actually following it when the time comes. And I think that's just been tactically a way for me to achieve that. And then, yeah, there's going to be times when you have to make decisions. Should I, between life and work, and I kind of like to just frame it from looking back on it in terms of, what's going to be most important as I look back on it later, and that's a good way to avoid regrets. And then I also like to kind of reflect periodically on just how I'm doing on that balance. So we have this concept in tech around sprint reviews. Look back and say what's working, what's not working, what do I want to change, or what's a new idea I want to improve in the future. And I find that works incredibly well for life as well, because you're only going to really know, how you did on that decision based on how do you feel later. Was that a good call? And not to dwell on the past, but just to know, all right, I'm going to have another opportunity or my next sprint iteration, and this is what I'm going to do next time, and then just keep moving forward. We're only going to learn if we, mix up, have these small mistakes along the way. I think by having the periodic check-in keeps them small, because then you course correct on the next one. And yeah, another thing I would say is that your needs change over time too. Like your kids grow, your scenarios change, and so it is important to continue doing those check-ins, because you'll have new ideas and scenarios as well. All right, well, that is the end of the prepared content that I have today. So I put a couple ways here to keep in touch. And then for the last few moments here, I'm going to go into the remaining Q&A. So there's a comment here, being present in the moment is best. Kids grow up quick. Mine is heading off to college this fall, and I'm glad I took the time to start a business and be here with him. Now stepping back into the workforce and learning new things. Moms can do it. That's awesome. Yeah, I find it's really helpful to actually reflect or talk with people also at these, stages in life when, kids, it is a short period that you have with them here. And even when you're going through those hard moments, whether it's the waking up at night or whatnot, as I talk to people with their kids out of the house, they reflect back on that period pretty nostalgically. So it is a special time. Thanks for adding that. Here's another question. Do you have advice for new computer science college graduates looking for a first-time job? Yeah, congratulations, first of all. It's an exciting time. Definitely lots of things to consider here. I mean, I think there's, it's an interesting time to just think on what is going to be the most exciting space for you, industry, opportunity. I actually liked looking at job descriptions that I would immediately kind of get a reaction of what I was passionate or excited about. I think as I went through that, I wanted to work on something that was impacting a lot of people. So that's why I was excited to, to work on the integrated development environment for a visual studio where changes I was making would be immediately seen. And they were, developers who were going to be building applications that had an impact in the world. And then I believed in the company value and the mission and just what Microsoft was out to accomplish in the world. So those were a few criteria for me. I think that really varies, but I think just thinking about what is most important for you and where you want to work. And again, it's for this point in time, you can kind of reflect on, where you want to start, whether that's more of a startup learning, a larger company environment learning. I think definitely pros and cons from each of those. But yeah, happy to follow up if there's further aspects on there that you'd like to discuss. All right. Another great comment, give up guilt, be grateful for what you can do that day. Don't compare what happens in other homes. Yeah, I think that's a great perspective, and that it also aligns with the gratitude comment that I mentioned earlier. I think, that comparison mentality can sometimes lead us down unhealthy paths, but being grateful for all the amazing things that we have accomplished and we've had is can be a really healthy perspective as well. And let me see if we have time for one last question. How or where can we find inclusivity-friendly companies where women can thrive instead of just suck it up and try to survive? Yeah, it's an important topic. I was kind of thinking about that also with the new graduate question. As much as do your research, do your homework before you take any job opportunity. You can ask through the interview process if you can meet, your manager is critically important. Your manager could also change, so you don't want to make it like the only factor, but at least, for the time that you have, definitely start the best foot forward. So that's important that you kind of get to talk with that person. Maybe you can have normally I would say go to lunch with them, but maybe some kind of informal remote meeting to get to know them a little bit as well. But ask if you can meet other people on the team, the peers who you would work for, and ask open-ended questions. What are the biggest challenges that you face? You can ask some scenarios around like, what is the maternity leave like? What is the sick leave like process? Just get a sense of like how supportive and accepting it is. Maybe ask them how they've navigated the current pandemic time and what kind of support they're providing for employees. So there are websites as well where you can see comments from current employees of the company. Those are a few just quick tips. I'll give it the last moment for how to think about that. And then there's another comment, how do you adjust to change when coming back from maternity leave? I'll comment briefly just because we're at the end here, and then feel free to share additional points. Yeah, I would say it's a little bit stressful coming back from leave. You kind of go from being full-time working to full-time mom, and then you're back. But I found actually it's been way easier than I ever expected at any point. There's kind of okay, I know how to do that. Like you're kind of back in the groove. There are some things that have happened during that time, and I don't think you need to go back and read every email. Many people just say that they're not going to read them, they delete them, but it's actually nice to have there to search it later when relevant projects or topics come up. You can find those. Do find ways to kind of like know what you don't know. For me, I had to find out about some features that we had shipped while I was out so that I could be smart about that and represent and build on them. So that's just a specific example. But once I enumerated those, I can go and learn, research them, and get up to speed. And a lot of the meetings, like you get up to speed really quickly. It's a little bit amazing, like how much you could miss so many, but still come back just fine. Take time to network with others and learn about what they've been up to during that period. Anything you can read in advance. But I think overall, to be honest, the first few weeks, like not everybody in the company might even know that you're back. Like it actually is, you have time to kind of build that list, research, and get back up to speed. And yeah, I find like before you know it, you won't know that time was missed. So those are a few things I share there. We also have a group called Returnity, which I think is an interesting group just in terms of support groups. Like having a support group with people who are also returning to work is really valuable for both like the new things you have to handle at home and just that process of like reacclimating at work. So I think that's another area for a support group, whether you have one already at your company or something you can suggest or add, or maybe join one in the industry. I know we're actually even over a couple minutes on time, so I'll go ahead and wrap there. Thanks everybody for joining and for engaging today. Lots of great comments and questions. It's important topic, so really happy to spend the time with you all today, and good luck on your journeys. Thanks everybody.
Thank you so much, Lisa. This was fantastic. Really appreciate you taking the time once again and putting on an amazing session. We had some really great engagement out there. Attendees, thank you all for being a part of this session. We have Lisa back again on April 12th, covering tips for effective data science in the enterprise. So if that is of interest, definitely feel free to tune in. Same time, same place. If you've missed any of her previous sessions, we also have that listed on our YouTube channel. Similar to this, great content, lots of great resources available there that she's provided, wonderful insights. So check those out. I dropped the YouTube link into our chat, so feel free to follow through there and you can just do a search. If you are not part of our community yet, we ask that you become it. We are always putting out interesting things, primarily for, developers and startups, but also just overall business development. So check out our MicrosoftReactor.com site, find a time zone that works for you, and look at the sessions that we have available there. If you are a part of Meetup or not yet, it's a wonderful and very user-friendly website, easy to navigate and check out events and search for things of interest. So find one of the local Microsoft Reactor meetups and sign up, follow our pages. We also have a newsletter we recently started, aka.ms/reactor email sign up that you can do. We usually target your local time zone and send just one bulk email at the start of each month to give you updates on whatever events are being featured that month. So we don't, bombard you with a bunch of emails. It's just that one time. And I dropped into the chat a survey link. If you enjoyed this session, if you have feedback for future, just please do follow that link, enter event code 12842. We'd appreciate you taking the time and providing that information. And then at this time, I will say adieu. Thank you all once again. I know I say that a lot, but we really do appreciate the attendees being a part of this community, because without you, we wouldn't be able to do what we do. So have a good rest of your days, and definitely check out some of the other International Women's Day events that we have going on for this week, and stay tuned. Take care.